Welcome to the Educator Podcast, where we challenge the status quo in education. Excuse me, in education. Got a little excited this morning. It's hosted by me, Angie, also known as the Unboxed Educator. And this space is dedicated to school leaders, teachers, and education enthusiasts who believe in the power of culture, creativity, and a little bit of chaos on purpose. Each episode, we unpack the hidden barriers to transformative education and explore real world strategies for leading change, nurturing student centered learning, and fostering thriving communities from igniting authentic school cultures to integrating STEAM in innovative ways. We'll empower you with practical insights and inspiring stories from the field. Join us as we break the mold and reimagine what's possible in education, one conversation at a time. So, welcome back to the Unboxed Educator, the podcast where we think freely, teach boldly, and lead differently. Again, I am your host, Angie, also known as the Unboxed Educator, and this is the second episode in our series on the hidden cost of ignoring school culture. So, if you missed the first episode, we unpacked what happens when culture is left unchecked, from burnout to student disengagement. But today we are shifting gears. We're talking solutions, specifically how to build morale that actually lasts even in tough seasons. Because when teachers say it's just been a hard year, they're not talking about the standards or scope and sequence. They're talking about culture. And if you're a leader, whether you're formal or informal, that matters. So today we're going to get into this topic and think about ways that we can improve culture in our school buildings and build up morale that is sustainable and lasts over time. So let's get into it. I am Angie, your Unboxed Educator, and I just want to get into it. So prior to the work that I'm doing now, I was a STEAM and project-based learning coordinator. So I had the privilege of supporting elementary, middle, and high schools, and the pattern was clear. The schools that thrive are not always the ones with the flashiest tech or the best test scores. They're the ones where culture is strong enough to carry everything else. So, morale, relationships, and trust. These are not soft skills, they're survival skills in this work. So, what does it take to build morale that sticks? So, today we're going to dive into three culture building moves that go deeper than compliance and surface level team building games. So, what are those three moves that can build lasting morale? So, make space for teacher voice. That seems pretty clear, but it's not always easily executed. So, let's start with this. Staff meetings should not feel like a PowerPoint hostage situation. They should feel like conversations. Transform meetings from information dumps into living feedback loops where staff help create the work that they commit to. Build in space for teacher voice through intentional check-ins, celebrations of small wins, and real feedback loops that actually impact decision making because people commit to what they create. If your teachers never get to speak or feel like what they say does not matter, the culture will pay the price. Because again, people commit to what they help create. So empower meaningful collaborations, and collaboration should not just mean shared planning time on a calendar. True collaboration requires a couple things. First of all, you need to have clear expectations, protected time, and psychological safety. Oh, that psychological safety, because when teachers know they are trusted to problem solve without micromanagement, real innovation happens. So when you protect time, set clear goals, and cultivate psychological safety, so teams can innovate without micromanagement. So I just kind of, when we talk about stories from the field, I remember there was a time I was on a instructional leadership team. And we were going around to the different schools doing calibration sessions to ensure that we were all on the same page when it came to teacher observations. And for those that don't know, I'm a former math science teacher. I also dibbled and dabbled in social studies, but science is my jam. So when I tell you about some science content, that again is my jam. So when we think about that, we went in and this teacher, it was on a Monday, and she was doing a lab. Oh, it was so good that even after the calibration session, I went back in the classroom to spend time with her and the babies because they were having a great time. And again, I love science. And but during the calibration, she was downgraded, and one of the downgrades was she was not following her lesson plan. And so I looked at where she should be on the scope and sequence. She was where she needed to be, but she had on her lesson plan that she was supposed to be doing the lab on Wednesday. But we were there again on a Monday. And the lesson was phenomenal. And the question I asked her, so why are we downgrading her? They said she wasn't following the lesson plan. So did anybody ask her why she pivoted? No one spoke about that. Another question was, where's the feedback that she got for the lesson plan that was turned in the week prior? Because this teacher, although phenomenal educator, was very compliant. She did what she was asked to do. And I just went back out of curiosity and asked the teacher when I went back to spend time with them in the classroom. I said, we were scheduled to do the lab on Wednesday. What happened? And she told me, she said, well, I didn't think the lab materials would come in time. And in order to make sure, it was in my lesson plan because I knew I wanted to cover it, the materials came in early and I was able to get everything set up. And I just believed that instead of doing the lab after teaching, I wanted to do the lab as the book, which is great, especially when you think about 5E and we can talk about, the 5E model. We can talk about that a little later in another podcast. But she wanted to hook the students so that as they went through the lesson and learned more, they had something to reference to. So to me, that was brilliant. The teacher, she made a professional decision to support where her students were, excuse me, and felt that the lesson would flow better. We should be able to give teachers that level of autonomy. We hired them to be professionals and not, all puns intended, put them in a box. So we want to, make sure that we are unboxing those educators. And I've been in environments, I've seen what happens when a team is given a shared goal, a little room to breathe, and leadership that trusts the process. It's electric, and teachers can rise to the challenge. Another example from the field, same thing. In a different environment, the teacher scores were off the charts, higher than everyone else on their team. But if you looked at her observation data, it made it seem as though she didn't know what she was doing and that she wasn't a good leader and in her classroom. And so, this was the type of teacher that came in themed, dressed up, did what she needed to do to reach the kids, and it was very effective. And the conversation sometimes that needs to be had with leadership is, what have we done to equip ourselves to support teachers? We can have a script, and I know in managing a building, it is a lot of work, and you want as much consistency in spaces where you can. But if you have a teacher that is moving the bar, moving the results, you may want to reevaluate because we're talking about being equitable here, and that does look different for each teacher. How do we support the teacher that can think outside the box and at the same time reach students and meeting the school goals when we see the improvement because it shows up in the data? Because if not, that teacher can become disgruntled, disengaged because they believe and feel that they're doing a phenomenal job, and they are. The data proves it. Um, but because it's really ouchy here for a second, it's our ego, because we want things a certain way, and sometimes that certain way isn't the best way. And anyone who I've worked with, coached, been on a team with, they'll tell you I have a lot of little sayings, but one is married to a good idea, but not my idea. So come with an idea, of course, but then be okay with people saying what parts are good and what they can interject to make it better, because that is how we all grow. So the next part of that is making sure we're leading with consistency, not compliance. That goes back to the lesson plan thing. Give teachers, excuse me, a chance to be creative in their spaces. That's what we hired them for. Because, and I'll say this one is specifically for leaders, staff will tolerate a lot, but what they cannot tolerate is inconsistency. Inconsistent expectations will erode trust faster than a bad initiative ever will, because culture is built or broken in the follow through. So leadership should model the same accountability, clarity, and care that they expect from teachers, and not once, not sometimes, but consistently. Model the same clarity, care, and accountability you expect from everyone else every day, not just on paper. So when you think about that, prior to becoming an educator, I worked in corporate. I was a supervisor in a call center. And one thing I loved about that work, because sometimes we forget that education is still a business. There's still business aspects and there's still accountability measures that all interested parties need to be held accountable to. So we did something called 360 surveys. And the surveys were, of course, your team and then your peers and then your superiors. But then you had to send surveys to people that did not report to you or work with you directly, but who had access to give feedback on your work. And what that does, it's a culture audit. We can think one thing, but how do the people really feel? And so that's something that I would challenge you to do, thinking about a culture audit. If your staff feels exhausted, disengaged, or divided, the solution is always not a new program. It might just be time for a culture audit. You want to ask the questions. How do we want it to feel to work here? And then what is one step we can take this month to make that real? And sometimes the most radical thing a leader can do is just listen, not defend, not debate, but truly hear. And the reality is sometimes we get offended when we're challenged, especially as leaders. And most leaders don't want to admit that. And then we end up making an emotional decision that we may regret later because we didn't want to seem as though we didn't know what we were doing. I'm telling you, transparency and a little bit of professional vulnerability go a long way. Yes, you want to be respected as a leader, but you also need to let the people that you work for, and we'll talk about that at a later time, because you're there to support them in this work, also know that you are a human being as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. And lastly, I always end with a call to action. So here is my challenge to you. And I know here in the South that schools are probably out, so you're thinking about next year, but look around and think about where the morale was the lowest. Do you know where it was the highest? Were there any patterns that you may have noticed? Even if you didn't publicly acknowledge them, did you notice them because they exist? Then ask yourself, what is one shift you can make or your team can make in how you lead, listen, or support that would build trust? So these are just a couple of things, that when you think about that call to action and you're planning for next year, what you can look into. Okay. And if you've experienced a strategy or a moment that truly shifted the culture at your school, I want to hear about it. You can send me a message on Instagram at Unbox Educator or connect with me on LinkedIn or YouTube. You can also connect on the website, which I am building. It is a new resource, but it is there and available. There'll also in the future be professional development offerings for both teachers, leaders, anyone that wants to make an impact and difference in education. And that website is unboxlearning.org. I will tell anyone, I know a lot, but I don't know everything. So let's learn from each other, not just complain about the problem, because those teachers were hired by your staff. So if there's a problem, is it the teacher or is it the leader's capacity to be able to support the teacher? And how do we grow in that way? How do we build our own capacity so that we can support teachers? Because when we're complaining about them not performing, are we also thinking about ways that we could support them better in the work? So that's just something to think about. So that's it for this episode with the Unbox Educator. Thank you for tuning in, sharing space, and continuing this conversation with me. Remember, culture is not an extra thing. It is everything. And until next time, keep teaching, think freely, teach boldly, and lead differently. This episode of the Unbox Educator was brought to you by Unbox Learning, the same organization that believes that we should think freely, teach boldly, and lead differently. Again, remember to connect with us on Instagram at Unbox Educator, and you can also get additional resources and follow our blog on the website at unboxlearning.org. Have a great day.